Oh, that's me. Okay, welcome to the Recreation and Parks Committee meeting. So we have, Delene, can you do the roll call, please?
Sorry, Darlene, give me 1 second. I'm just
Yep.
trying to move these two over.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have Darlene Young as chair, Heather Dunn, Mr. Stowers, Doug Sutton, Ken Hughes, and Lisa Shanahan.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so we have a quorum.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. Next on the agenda is public participation. There will be no one because we're only doing the discussion piece. Do you see the panelists there? Do you see them, Delene?
Yep, I just moved.
Okay.
Oh,
So before they start, we have no old business and no new business for tonight's meeting. For discussion purposes only, we will be talking about proposed fees. Is that correct, Mr. Stowers, right?
We're just having a briefing on the fees and charges study.
And so with that, we will move forward with our consultants. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Stowers.
Yeah, I think when I first in my interview with the mayor before I was hired, we talked a lot about philosophies about fees and charges, and I told him about my philosophy is more in the area of equity pricing, and not so much, free or lowering the fees. It's more, my philosophy was more, let's find out what the market will bear, and then let's give access to those who cannot afford it in other ways. So one of the ways, and I'm not saying my philosophy rules the day, but because I'm not on the council, so but I would say that I think it's a lot more equitable that we when we're charging folks, if they can afford the fees, then they should pay it. If they can't, then we should have a mechanism like a scholarship fund or leaving so many spaces open in our programs for people that can't afford it. I think the key to it is finding a system that we can use to make those a judgment. But we did one of the ways we can find out about if we are charging fees in the marketplace that can sustain the fees. We had a market study done, fees and charges study done by MGT consulting firm, and they are an accounting and a financial feasibility firm. And tonight we have Bruce Cowens and Paril Patel, and they are the consultants that worked on this project for MGT, and they're going to make the presentation tonight, a presentation of about 20-25 minutes, and then we're going to have questions. What this study does give us, it gives us a sense of what we're able to charge. It gives us a sense of what the market will bear in our particular city. It also, they did a very thorough analysis on cost of revenue. So what are our programs costing? Not just, not just looking at the labor costs, but looking at overhead, looking at supplies, looking at everything that goes into a program or a program category, and seeing what this particular program actually cost. And it's going to help us make some decisions about setting revenue goals on return. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Bruce Cowens. He has a slide that I think we passed around, the slideshow, and then Paril, she's going to she's gonna go through a financial analysis.
Okay. Thank you. Parl,
I'm
could
sorry,
you?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
And
just excuse me.
before you start, Mr.
Mhm.
Bruce, please, we recognize, Mr. Lopez came on about 7:03.
Okay, also, we do have one person on for public participation. Let me just make sure they don't want to speak. Ms. Loricello, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand electronically. Okay, it does not appear so.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Bruce Cowens, and I was a project manager for this effort. I work with Parl Patel. Parl, would you please share these slides to the screen? While she is doing that, just as a word of background, the city asked a few things of us. One was, of course, to determine the cost of the different program areas and compare them to current revenues to see how thoroughly they recover current costs. We also did a great deal of community engagement. We had focus groups, and we had a mail-in survey and an online survey. All told, we received input from several hundred residents. And one of the key questions that we began with is, what do you think of the services? Because as a prelude to any decision about fees, you need to know how do the people that pay them feel about the value of what they get. I am pleased to report, and I'm sure you will be pleased to hear that rather uniformly, people like the services that you provide. That I don't think we expected that wouldn't happen, but I think we're happy to know that. Parl, could you? We're now on MGT General slide. Can we get the slides back up, please? There you go. Next page, please. Okay, so this is a list of what we're going to discuss. Let's begin with the project scope. Next slide. These were really the three things that we were asked to do. Determine how the cost of the services compares to the prices, get feedback from the community, and discuss with the director what are some strategy options around what we found. Next slide, please. The public sector space has a niche for people that do these cost studies. A lot of this flows from federal regulation on how to do cost analysis. And it's really a matter of taking costs at the departmental level and drilling down to the level of the activities in question. So we have a purpose-built model for that. We do a lot of this work. I've personally done more than 1,000 fee studies. And we were in discussion with staff about effort levels by program type and the costs, both those attributable directly to the programs and some of the shared costs that benefit all programs and appropriate ways to allocate those. Most cities have a policy to recover a certain portion of the cost of recreation fees. We think that's a good idea. But in order to have a policy to recover a certain portion of those costs, the next question is, well, what are those costs? And that was the purpose of the cost study. Next slide, please. Parl, this is for you to walk us through, please. You're muted. Lower left. While she's unmuting, the lower left portion of your screen. There you go.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. So we work with the Recreation Department to capture the fiscal year 23 expenditures, revenues, personnel data. Went through all those details to really identify some key program areas and then all of the administrative staff. We work with recreation staff to capture time allocations across all of these various program areas, including non-fee related activities. With input from Recreation Department, we identified all of the indirect expenditures as well as any program-specific expenses. We took that information to build hourly rates for every administrative position and a departmental indirect cost rate. We took the rate and we applied it to all of those staff costs and staff time allocations that we received by program. And then we took that information to calculate costs for every program area, and then we compared it to fiscal year 23 revenues, resulting in those current cost recovery levels that you see here by each program category. The industry norm is to recover about 25 to 30% of recreation service costs from fees. Based on all the calculations, the average cost recovery here, including your non-fee related activities, is about 23%. The results of the study provide the information to help develop a cost recovery policy. There's room for up to 15% increase to fees in these program areas. Even with the increases to the program area fees, you can still stay within industry range.
And I would note, looking at the right-hand column, current cost recovery, that you see very different levels of recovery by program area. I am not aware that that was the subject of a deliberate discussion, but I would hope that you would take that into account in your deliberations, that the cost recovery from programs varies quite a bit by program area. Next slide, please. We'll come back to that one later for discussion, but next slide, please. You can't raise prices if people don't like what you do. So we spent a lot of time collecting resident input, and a lot of these people were former participants in the programs. That's really how we got the lists. They thought programs were of good quality. One of the questions we asked is, if fiscal pressure required some changes, which would you prefer? Adjust the fees or reduce the offerings? And it just came through very loud and clear. People were, I don't say you're never going to get people excited for higher fee prices. That's not to be expected. But they would prefer fee increases to reducing their access to these services. We asked also about a range of increase that they thought was reasonable. And the vast majority said up to about 15%. The good news for you, based on the previous slide in cost recovery, is that if you're currently recovering 23% of your cost and the industry norm is about 25 to 30%, that you could have that 15% increase that people said they could accept and still remain within the industry range for reasonableness of your prices. Next slide, please. We spoke with Director Stowers, who told us that he had checked with the neighbors, and Norwalk fees are, by and large, less expensive than the peers. That's an important finding, because nobody wants to find out that they're asking for more in an area where they're already beyond what other people do. But as we understand it, you charge less than your peers, and your cost recovery is somewhat below industry norms. People think the services are good, and they'd rather accept some fee increases than see you adjust to financial pressures by cutting back on their access to these activities. Okay, so I think that's the end of our slides. Paul, would you go? Oh, recommendation. Okay, yeah, two more slides. We think you should increase or consider increasing fees by up to 15%. Looking at the table that we had up earlier, you may want to vary that a little by program area, because in some areas you're already above that 25 to 30% area, and those are probably not areas that you would seek revenue from. Youth summer camps and parking in particular are recovering a greater share of cost, with parking actually being in a slight surplus. They expressed an interest in some facilities improvements, and they said that they would be willing to pay for that, but I think we need to temper that with the understanding that If you are adjusting prices to reduce the drain on the general fund, I'm not sure how much more room there is in there for facilities improvements funded by fees. The cost to refresh the facilities will have to be recognized in your financial statements under a rule known as GASB 34. And really what that rule says is the cost of the program is not simply the annual appropriation. Any other capital investments that you have that depreciate over time, if you don't refresh them, you are losing your investment in the ability to provide those services. And it would be nice to consider that in your financial planning. Next slide. I think there's one more. Yes. Okay. So we think it would be in your interest to establish a cost recovery policy. I would say at least 25%. I mean, you could go as high as 100. The value of that then is that, you know, speaking as a former council member myself, nobody's ever going to be thrilled to have to increase fee prices. But if good policy is that there should be some degree of cost recovery, and you declare that as a policy, then from time to time, as you refresh the analysis and find you're not in compliance, you have already declared that it's the city's intent to charge that portion of costs through fees and leave that cost off of the taxpayers. We also found that there's some room to increase communication of activities. There were certain segments of the city's demographic, including a racial breakdown, that showed that people of color felt slightly less aware of what they might have, and that could help shape a policy for how to let them know about it. Okay, so Parl, if you will please go back to the table. I will stop talking and turn it back to you for your questions about where you would like to go next with this deliberation.
So I thank you for the presentation. So the non-fee related activities, what's included in that? What are those?
Well, we didn't really break down activities in that, so I'm going to have to return to Director Stowers for some input on that.
Those are administrative kinds of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that would be something that we're not necessarily looking to increase.
Right. No.
Right.
And that might involve getting a grant or two from some community groups, like for instance, what's the store? Anyway, we receive donations for free swimming classes and that kind of thing. So we do receive donations and some sponsorships for our jazz and stuff like that. So it's money recovered through administrative means.
Yeah. Now, another view of this would be that those costs could be allocated and shared among the other program areas. I think given the magnitude of the costs here, it's not going to make a huge difference in the findings. We're already of a finding that your current prices are recovering revenue below our expectations nationally. And doing that would just change it a little bit, but it would make it even worse.
I wonder if Peru can go through and the other and show how she came up with the cost.
Yeah, that might be good for you to see a look through the model. While she does that, let me just say this. Our firm does a great deal of user fee work and have found it necessary for that purpose to have a model to do that in. It's in Excel, but it's highly automated with macros for those of you who know Excel. The goal is facts are put in tables and the calculations draw on the facts in those tables. By making it table-based, if you put an updated number in one place, it will float everywhere else where it is needed. And then it also becomes not only how we document our findings, but it's an interview guide for our discussion with staff so that we can go through the description of their work and get to the findings. So, Parl, why don't you go back to the PSA worksheet and just quick quick tour of what's in there. You'll have to make that one a little bigger, please. That's very small.
All right, let me just kind of do a high level. So, there's a lot of different activities among underneath each of these areas, but we did this at the program level. That's what all these categories are that you saw on that cost recovery slide. But from there, this is all the administrative staff that were identified for recreation and parks. And all of these folks on this list, we captured time estimates on, where they spend their time on average across all the various activities or programs, including those non-fee related. And then we took all the expenditures for recreation in detail and took all these expenditures to develop a departmental rate, as well as calculating hourly rates for each position. And then for each position, we captured, like I mentioned, time across the different programs. And then including their staff time and then any specific costs related to these programs to get to, this full cost by program area. That's how we got to that number. And we're comparing it with the actual revenues that were collected in 23. And that's how we get that recovery. It's, yeah.
The table that you saw in the slide deck is extracted from here. But the value of looking at this is there were a lot of discussions and analysis behind this in order to drill down on the departmental budget and push it into the program areas that benefit from that.
I think Lisa Shanahan has her hand up. She's hand up for a minute.
You want to hear from me, Robert? Is that okay?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, great. So I had a question about, real user fees versus, things that we all share, like picnic tables and picnic grounds and things like that. So you sort of look at something like marinas, morages, and boat ramps, and I feel like, wow, that's a really specific user who has a specific thing that they're using the city for. So is there a philosophy about, how much should be recovered for things like that? It feels like, wow, if you own a boat and you're using our marina, you ought to pay what you would pay for, somebody else's mooring. Whereas youth summer camps, I understand why we might want to underwrite that. You guys are smiling, so tell me.
Absolutely.
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 In the literature on user fees, and there is a literature, I'm wonky enough to have read it. The question is a gatekeeper. A public park does not have fees because unless you gate it and have somebody standing there collecting, it's available to anybody, whether they live in the community or not. There's really no way to control access. For registered programs, that's not the case because people cannot participate without going through a process of telling you who they are, and that's the point where you can charge them.
Yeah, and that's why when we talked about setting a revenue goal for each category, why it goes up to 100%. And
So are you telling me that you're thinking that marinas ought to be a higher, like 75% capture or something like that? Because these are
I think the philosophy is where programs benefit the public at large, where it's a broad public appeal, we tend to not try and recover everything. I think, but when things like golf or marinas, morages, boats, where there's really a single user, really, even though they might come in groups, it's really a single user. We need to recover more. We need to recover up to 100% for that.
Right. I think you take into account willingness and ability to pay, but I think you have to charge for some of these things because the city incurs a cost to employ the people that do this. And it's not reasonable to incur that cost without knowing if you're going to have some offsetting revenue or at least some demand for it. If it's a drop in if you want and then you don't have to, how do you budget for that? How do you staff that? Ms. Young, you had a hand up?
I can't see myself. No, I'll put it down.
Okay.
About the boat, we're just talking about, is there a permit that goes with that?
Yeah.
You have to have a permit.
Yeah, we spoke, we were in a focus group, we spoke with people in the various program areas. I, not too surprisingly, I think the nature of having a boat puts you in a different willingness or at least ability to pay. Um, uh, so some communities might say, you know, we don't mean to gouge you. That's not at all what's going on. But in terms of charging for a portion of what happens here, boat owners tend to perhaps be a little better able to afford it than a kid in a afternoon activity.
Same with facility rentals.
Yeah.
Facilities rentals are, you know, I'm choosing to go and rent a place. It's not, there's not really a public benefit in that it's a public benefit that, you know, the facilities is serving the public for meetings in that way. But if I, as a person and my family or my group wants to rent a place, then that's a different, you know, that's different. We're here mainly to serve the public good, and things with a wide public benefit, they can be charged at a lower rate.
Right. I mean, you've got, I think, one of the 4 largest dog shows in the country. Love dogs. That's not the question, but you know, to the extent that if you don't charge fees, it's on the taxpayers. Is it really fair for people to come from out of town and participate in that at your taxpayer expense?
Jonathan, Joanne Lopez, Mr. Lopez.
Thanks, over. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Yeah, quick question. Something that comes to mind, like, are there any strategies that you've seen that work in your experience that kind of helps make a recovery program sustainable during something like an economic downturn?
Yeah.
Something to that effect. That just comes to mind. If anything you've noticed in experience that you think that seems to work.
Well, there are a few ideas that we came across in the study that I think you might think about. Number one is a little bit more publicity to generate demand. I think there are people out there that said, "Oh, I didn't even know I could do that. Tell me more about it. I might do that." I think a policy not to charge full cost is an incentive to participate. I've done a lot of recreation fee studies. I have never found anybody that wanted to run a recreation and parks department like a health club or country club. They're just sort of a premise that if you live in a city, you will have access to these amenities. And you will have to pay, but part of the communication here would be that cost recovery is not intended to be fully from fees, that the taxpayers are expected to support this in the name of quality of life in the community and healthful exercise and so forth. But that would be it. Now, if you ever had a year where you had extra revenue and you could put it into some sort of account to pay for years that were softer, that might help make it a little more sustainable. I think when you're not charging full cost recovery fees, that would be very hard to do. It's not impossible. I have had some clients that have had sponsorship opportunities for businesses in town to contribute to funds that support the programs as well, with the understanding that if they contribute, there will be some display of their name with the activity so that the community may appreciate their generosity.
What some cities have done, Councilman Lopez, is, and I have brought it up to the BET Council. The first stab at it didn't work, but and we're going to come back. But a lot of cities have set up what they call a park fund, and so they're able to generate revenue through other entrepreneurial ventures, initiatives that pop up. They're able to fund them without going back to the council for money, because the park fund has money in it. And from those funds, they create a very healthy scholarship fund. I think right before I left Seattle, their scholarship fund was in the millions. And so, you know, that came from over years of generating generating revenues from being able to take advantage of trends that came. We didn't have to wait till the next budget year to do a program that popped up, like pickleball pop up. We you know, we could address it right away and take advantage of it, not wait for a whole year for the budget to come around again. And
Right.
and we've actually went to the last financial director, Henry, and he understood it completely. But then when he left, we weren't able, and he was supporting it, but then when he left, we weren't able to articulate it as well as he could. So to the BET. So we'll make another stab at it. But it's really providing access for those times through other means. It's really, you know, sometimes we talk about free or just keeping the fees low so people can afford it, but it's not equitable. You know, it's not equitable for my kid to come in to, say, the aquarium for $2.25 or $5, and then Bill Gates' son comes in for the same price. And so we want, you know, we're looking for a more equitable way of charging fees, and it's our intent. And I told the mayor this, and we briefed the mayor. The mayor had the same briefing. Our intent is to develop a scholarship fund, healthy one, for summer camps, for all our activities. So.
Right. So, and just to be clear here, take the first line, indoor, outdoor sports, current cost recovery 10%. When we say 15% increase, it's 15% of that. We're not talking about taking 10 to 25. It would be 11.5% is a 15% increase. We had some discussion among ourselves before this presentation about history that we've seen when communities increase recreation fees. Did any demand taper off? Did we wind up driving anybody away? And look, you can never say somebody's going to be frustrated and say, well, forget it, I'm not going to go. But the reality, and Director Stowers, you can weigh in on this, is the experience is, for the most part, people just kind of begrudgingly say, look, I want the programs. I expect from time to time costs will go up.
Yeah, it's funny because I've done a lot of these studies when I was a director of the aquarium, and I've done a lot of studies in parks as well. And it's not a science. I mean, there are companies out there that try to project negative participation or a fall in participation. But what we found out mostly, except for maybe in the youth sports area, where I think we really have to be careful there. But we found out for the most part, people associate price with value. So if something looks cheap, it's cheap to them. If something is, look a value, they will actually increase the participation. I was involved in one study of our Japanese gardens in Seattle, and we raised the price substantially because we were working on some improvements in some of the ponds that had some of the fish in it, and we wanted to redo some improvements. So we thought we would finance some of the improvements through a fee increase. So we substantially increased them, and we expected a drop off of about 20%, 20-25% in participation, but actually we had a 25% increase in participation because there's associated value. And the same as you look around the country at aquariums. The aquariums used to be very, very cheap to go to. They're no longer, because people value. They've set a value to, and people respect the value. And so most times participation will not fall off, but in some of the places you have to be careful is where you have the most youth activities. You have to be careful there, not to increase too fast or too much.
Yes.
Ask a
Go
question?
ahead.
I think that's really, I love this. I love this data. Thank you so much for doing it. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate it. One of the things that stands out to me is things like, it looks like the city is only subsidizing like, $250,000 for aquatics, and for, a community where we need to make sure that our kids know how to swim, and for a waterfront community, versus subsidizing facility rentals for close to $500,000. Do you have any recommendations of specific areas where we should prioritize
I-
fees
Well,
to, or
I give you
reducing?
my opinion, but it's only an opinion. Certainly here on parking and youth summer camps, I wouldn't touch them. I feel like your level of cost recovery on those does not need a current adjustment. The others, indoor outdoor sports, yeah, I think a 15% increase is going to be acceptable to the public. Aquatics, I would probably keep the price low for learning to swim, just for public safety reasons. But if people want pool time or swimming in some sort of league or team, okay, it's going to cost you another few bucks. Facility rentals, I would certainly increase those. And I'm thinking particularly, I don't mean to pick on them again, but the dog show. It's a huge success as a dog show. You should be proud to host it. But I'm having a hard time understanding why taxpayers should have to underwrite that.
Too, that's pretty popular.
Yeah, well, we all love dogs, but it's not the dogs themselves that pay. So I would just kind of go down that list. I think facility rentals could go up. Marinas, mortgages, and boat ramps, I think, could go up. Picnic grounds, you don't get the number of rentable picnic tables is such that even if you increase it, it's not going to generate a whole lot more money. I think it's equitable to do so, but I don't think it's going to yield a big dividend. Across the board with a $1.1 million revenue total, if you go up by roughly 15%, it's not going to solve all budget problems, but it will fund a few positions.
Can you just expand on that, maybe, Robert, too? So that's the second highest cost here. And the revenue is very low. But so what can we do? I mean, what other things have been done to kind of increase that? It just,
You're talking about which category are you talking about?
I'm sorry, the picnic ground and table park.
Oh, because I think what you're seeing there, and Ken can elaborate on this. I think you're seeing a lot of the beach cost in there, because that's where the picnic tables and that kind of thing is. We don't really have a program right now where we are renting picnic tables, but in answer to you, what can we do about it? We can't, there are some ideas being generated of having more, picnic areas where they can be reserved, and also, putting our beach staff to work on some other things down at the beach.
That's it. You have to.
But right now we
staff it.
don't have a program where we really we don't really reserve picnic tables right now, and we really don't we really don't use our parks for weddings. We don't charge for weddings when people are in our parks and that kind of thing, where most parks around the country do. And so there's some things that we're thinking about doing. Our recreation staff and our facility staff with Ken over that. There's some things we're thinking about doing to generate more revenue in that area.
And
If I may,
go ahead.
I think the marketing idea that came up earlier, getting the word out. There were people who in the feedback we got said, I didn't even know I could do this. If you can bring in more registrants, you will drive more revenue without necessarily increasing your cost.
Ken, you want to add to this?
Yeah, I was also going to add that the cost for the park usage also includes all the maintenance So whether or
Mhm.
not we have an
Right.
event at the site, we're still expending maintenance funds to keep that site maintained. So I think it's a little bit skewed, you know, in
Yeah.
terms of cost, because
Mhm.
that site has to be maintained whether or not there's an
Right.
event there or not.
Right.
Is there a difference, or is there something we can do to differentiate when we're doing permits for nonprofit and for-profit organizations?
You can. Yeah, that is fine. Means testing ability to pay is really unworkable because you know, you're not going to say to somebody, bring me your last tax return, and if it's below a certain number, you don't have to pay the fee. That's not going to work. But a registration to a nonprofit with a price preference for a local group, you know, theoretically you're willing to use some tax dollars to help the locals, but less so if they're from out of town.
And we currently do offer a 10% break for nonprofits.
Is that in line with other cities, or is that something we could increase? Because it seems like there are organizations making a lot of money that aren't nonprofits, you know.
Well,
that aren't-
right. And nonprofit doesn't even necessarily mean low budget either. There are nonprofits and there are nonprofits.
Yeah.
It's one
we-
thing to have a cancer walk, but it's another thing to have like our, you know, like a tournament for a lacrosse tournament.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And we always, you know, we weigh things too. I mean, there's exceptional circumstances where, you know, you always have to provide for some flexibility in your model. So, you know, it depends. There's one of the things I've done in my career is to weigh the public benefit. And that's why I started talking about public benefit, because public benefit is a return to the public as well. So programs that really have a public benefit, you know, we would probably tend to give them a break.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I agree. I was at a presentation one time on recreation fees to a council, and unannounced, the police walked into the room and asked for time at the mic. Sure, of course. What did they say? They said, we know you have financial challenges and that there may need to be some fee adjustments, but consider it is really in everybody's interest for a bunch of young people to have an organized and safe place to play instead of hanging out on the street corner. Please take that into account when you set your prices.
Yeah. Okay. What I want to do, this is a draft report. I think Ken, we put the full report in, we attached that to the agenda, and then this slide show as well. So you might want to, if in the next, I don't know, couple of weeks, you guys have, the council has more questions, or you like to, a little bit more explanation, or some things you'd like to see in the final report, we like to get your comments.
One of the things that I'd like to see maybe is how many people you project services. I know that's a big thing and not probably part of this necessarily, but how many participants are in outdoor sports and how many people participate in events that are facility rentals?
I think it's a good idea. We could drop the registrations as a column into this table. That might help you understand the breadth of any pricing decision that you would make.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is because like marinas, you know, moorings, it seems rather low, but it may be that it doesn't, as Lisa was saying, just it doesn't impact as many people.
It doesn't. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't impact as many people.
Okay.
And
So-
just, I think along those lines, I'm sorry, so do we think that the number of survey participants gives us a well-rounded enough view or perspective for us moving forward with changes?
I think that the number of responses that we got makes it a valid, makes the surveys valid. But as Bruce will tell you, and I think he mentioned it initially, that the communities of color didn't respond as well. But this has always been, in my career, it's always been a challenge on getting folks that may feel that they don't really have a voice to get them to respond or to participate. But we did have some. We did have a substantial amount. But of course, most of the responses came from communities that were a little better off. Would you say
And-
that, Bruce?
I agree.
Bruce?
Yes, yes. We got, I think, a substantial minority input, and I'm glad of that. And the participation rates, self-reported participation rates were lower in communities of color. I think that both keeps them from getting the full benefit of the services and speaks to the sustainability issue because, we'd love to have them join. To some extent, these programs are roughly a fixed cost. So if more people participate, you will be more financially sustainable.
And I'm speaking to in reference to we're at over 90,000 residents. And so what does that number really comparatively look like with the data that we've just received?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah, well, we receive from the department lists of who had participated in services. And we sent out obviously quite a large number of mailings and emailed people surveys for the online one from the email addresses available. You'd like to hear from everybody, but first of all, not all 90,000 residents do this.
Right.
And is it statistically random? No, but after conducting focus groups in each of these areas on this table and receiving survey responses from several hundreds of people, I think we felt like we had a sense of the community from that.
And your universe doesn't come from the whole city, it comes from a sample size. So we, in TELUS site, we had them do the, pick the universe, and then from the universe, you get the response. So the universe, I think, was 3,000 or so. And then your response is measured by the universe that they picked, that they sampled. So it's not like you can't sample the whole city, you just pick a universe.
And lastly, I know you said we had the lowest cost from our surrounding towns, correct? Do we know about how much? I mean, that would be interesting to know where we fall in all of that, but I think you've done that.
Yeah, we've done some surveys.
those.
Our staff have done some surveys and we know we're low. We're presently updating those. So when you get the new, the final fee study, that hopefully we can include some information in there about that. But also when we come to bring our recommendations on fee increases or fee adjustments or modifications, we will present that information as well.
Great.
But I can give you some examples, for instance, and even in summer camps where we are way up, we are in the 70 percentile in terms of cost recovery, but we're probably about 25 to 30% below our surrounding cities in terms of what they charge for youth camps. Even our public schools charge more than we do here in Norwalk for the summer camps, and we provide a lot more content, a lot more programming than the public schools do in their summer camps. So that's just an example.
Great, thank you. Johan?
Thank you, Chair. Robert, just a quick question. Speaking about the surrounding towns or city done. The towns or cities that were selected, were they cities or towns that are comparable to Norwalk, by levels of income or other variables as well?
When we do our survey of other cities that we did earlier, we did I think about 2 years ago when we were doing our revenue. They were just cities around us because the question is, well, how much does Westport, or how much that's how people see things. But this study didn't encompass that. This study looked at the city in and of itself what it could afford. But we'll take it another step and we'll look at the surrounding cities, because even in the briefing with the mayor, that was asked, because you're always going to get that question. So we're doing that for that reason. But I understand what you're saying, because normally if we were going to do a comparative fee study based upon cities, we would pick cities that have a common CPI, a common price index, and population, and that kind of thing, where it could be in California. It could be, for instance, when we did studies in Seattle, we compared Seattle with San Diego, San Francisco, because there's commonalities. We didn't compare them with cities around us, because it's oranges and apples sometimes. So I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Robert.
Mhm. Any other questions? Like I said, you guys can send us comments. I think you have the full report in your emails, and we're going to finalize this report, and then sometime in September or early October, we will have a public hearing, come to you with fee recommendations.
Great. So if there are no more questions for Mr. Bruce and his team, I think we're going to move on and call it an evening. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've been putting in, Robert. I mean, I just have to say that, and I say this a lot and I hadn't said it in a while, that the Recreation and Parks Department is now moving in the right direction and has been, and it should have always been a place where we generate some revenue. You know, it's not going to be the most revenue, but I think it is a place where we can do that, and we are doing that. And we're doing it in the right way and in a meaningful way, and in a way that adds value to what it is we're providing to our residents. So I really do appreciate the effort, and Ken and everybody else who's working to make this happen. And I appreciate Mr. Cohen's and Ms. Patel, what you presented to us this evening. And we just are excited about where we can go with this, because recreation and parks, I always say this, these are the things that attract people to a city, how it looks, and the opportunities to recreate makes a city vibrant. And so we are on the path to that. So thank you very, very much.
You know,
Thank
I always give credit to the staff, and you know, Ken's been you know, I think if I came here without Ken, it would have been a lot more difficult. And then the staff is just amazing. We have a small staff, but our staff is amazing. You know, somebody's down. I think we're having concerts right now. I think we have staff down at the concert tonight. I mean, they're all over the place.
I'm amazed at what you've been able, the
Mm.
department has been able to accomplish with such a small staff. So,
Thank you.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank
So,
you.
Hey, take care.
thank you. I don't know, we all in favor, right? I guess we adjourn, right? Motion to adjourn, Lisa? All in favor, all right. Thank you very,
Good
very
night.
much. Looking
Thank
forward to the final
Thank
product.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.